All right, y'all, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name is Jackson. I love talking music, especially with you all. And every single week, I like to take a look back at the new albums that I listened to in the previous week and discuss them, rate them, give them a score. And that's what we're doing again today. We've got 8 new albums to discuss, many of which dropped very recently. And we're gonna jump right into it here in a second. I do wanna say though, before we jump in, if you wanna know my take on any albums that I don't go over today, let me know in the comments. I might have a video breaking them down, or I might not. They might have come out, or I might have listened to them way before I started this series, or even this channel. It's still relatively new. So if there are any albums like that that you wanna know my take on, you wanna know my opinion, drop them in the comments. And of course, if I haven't listened to them yet, I'll be sure to add them to my list so that you can hear my take on them next week. But let me know in the comments. Otherwise, let's jump into it. We've got 8 fresh albums and EPs to talk about. So let's get into it. So first up was Vogue, the latest EP from Wasia project. Is it Wasia? I don't know, but it's on the screen. You'll know who I'm talking about. Now, let me start this by saying, of course, it was not until after I finished listening to this EP that I realized that it's actually part of an album releasing later this year. Usually I try and avoid those kinds of EPs and stick to the ones that are just solo releases, but oh well. If nothing else, I'm actually now somewhat excited for the upcoming album that's dropping from the duo later this year. The opening track, which was also the title track of this EP, was really about as strong as it could have been. Seriously, I love that song. I've kept coming back to it since I listened to it early last week, and it was a really neat rock-infused dance pop track that pulled in all sorts of other conventions and even really some notably Beatles-esque melodies and sounds that just, in all honesty, I immediately loved. And of course, it was all led by perfect vocals for the track. It was a cinematic track, it was electric, and it was right up my alley. Now, the other songs weren't quite as good as that opener, but they kept me interested and kept my attention for the remaining 12 or so minutes. As a whole, the vocals were certainly a standout on each track, as well as those electronic elements, although those very electronic elements can seem a little overdone at times, especially when you look at modern dance pop and those trends. Still, this EP checked quite a few boxes for me, and it gave me one really solid track to latch on to that, again, I've just really been loving. It was quality. I have nothing bad to say about the production or the songwriting. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm just pretty interested to see what the whole work will look like from the duo here in the next couple months, I think is when it's dropping. So I'm interested. If this sort of EP interests you, then maybe you could give it a listen too, or you could do like I normally would and wait for the whole album to drop. But regardless, if you come back after that album drops, I'll be talking about it here. In the meantime, my score for this EP was a 6.4. So not bad. Again, some of those other tracks drag it down a little bit, but none of them are overly horrible. But again, I'm interested. I hope there's a lot more sounds like that opening track. I really hope so. Next up was Sunshine by Jungle. This was a big release that a lot of people were looking forward to, and I don't know that I was in that camp necessarily. Not that I don't like Jungle or don't like their vibe. I do. This just isn't always my kind of record. Let's talk about this one. So I was really waiting for something to wow me or really speak to me. It never really came though on the album as a whole, unfortunately. I hate to say that because I like the vibes here, but unfortunately song after song after song felt really formulaic and repetitive. It just didn't work as a whole. The production was solid, as were most of the vocal arrangements, and from a purely objective standpoint, I think there's a lot that's really well done here. But all of that talent and all of those good elements are somewhat lost on this record due to a pretty apparent lack of direction. It really felt like 30 minutes of songs that were made just because they needed to make 30 minutes of songs. They didn't feel like there was any firm direction that they wanted to take this album or any firm ideas that they wanted to latch onto. Whether we take this album as individual songs or as a whole work, I really just struggle to buy into the idea that this album was necessary. again, objectively, it's solid, and that's why the score that you're going to see in a second is as high as it is. But I really can't see this record being much more than background music, which is unfortunate because, again, there's a genuine talent and goodness here, but it's lost upon a bit of a closer listen, at least in my opinion. Maybe I'm really missing something. It's entirely possible, but at the moment, my score is going to be a 5.7. I was hoping for something more. It was just way too formulaic. They need a more firm direction, and I know I've said that. They need more firm direction. Next up was an album that I was very excited for, and that is the latest release from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Alien Metal. Now, as a fan of the band, and as someone who knows that they have an apt for these yearly, super extreme genre shifts, you would think that I would not have been as surprised as I was that this was yet another really solid release. It's not a groundbreaking EDM record, and it's not a record that did anything particularly different or new as it pertains to the genre as a whole, but it was really fun. It was high energy, and it was totally electric, which, if nothing else for me, checks a whole lot of boxes. The two instrumental tracks that open and close the record were actually the two that I liked the least, and that's another thing that surprised me. I think that all of the vocal-led tracks, or at least the tracks that had vocals in them at all, were really, really solid. They were awesome. And another thing that really surprises me here is that the sound never really got stale. And that's especially surprising for the band who has never really touched this type of music. They've come close to it a time or two, but they've never jumped full force, head first, into EDM like this. And so even veterans of the genre can really struggle to keep an album like this feeling fresh all the way through. And they do it here. It's really surprising to me. The different psychedelic elements were an especially nice touch, and on top of this, it felt like a really nice callback to my favorite record from the band, Butterfly 3000, and of course the electronica was pulled off really spectacularly. There's not much more I can want here from the band, even if it's a wildly different sound than I'm used to, and that's even for their standards. So my score here is going to be a 7.9. We were close to something really great. I do think the sound can be a tad repetitive, but again, I think it stays fresh even still. You know, they kind of reuse those same conventions, but it never gets old. It's really surprising. Next up was a very different record, and that is, in all caps, I Am a Prism by Judah and the Lion. Again, a very different feel and a very different band all around. So let me just say, with the release of this record, 2026 might have just won the Triple Crown for completely horrible, abhorrent pop folk albums. Between the Mumford & Sons album, the Noah Kahan release, and now this one, we've now hit 3 genuinely awful, horrible pop folk albums that I've had to endure. And this one, I Am a Prism, might be the most irredeemable one out of the entire bunch. Everything about it is soulless. It's stripped completely down of everything that makes folk enjoyable and endearing in the first place. It's bad. I've said it before with those other albums, I'll say it again here. There's something really special about the folk genre, and when you commercialize it like Judah and the Lion have here, and like Noah Kahan and Mumford & Sons did, there's something weird that happens, but it strips it of any soul. When it's overly polished and so many other aspects of other genres are brought in to the extent at which you can't recognize that it's folk anymore, it's a horrible thing to have to endure. It really is, and that's what's happening here. The instrumentals are as palatable and commercialized as you could make them. The vocals are okay sometimes, and other times there's a horrid auto-tune ruining any ounce of enjoyment that you could possibly take from this. Auto-tune on a folk album. Even if it's a pop folk album, what are we doing here? The lyrics are completely horrible. They're filled with shallow allegory that you would find in a 4th grader's English class essay. There was nothing here to latch on to. There was nothing redeemable about this one, and I could not wait for it to end. Truly. This was a bad one. I would not recommend it, especially if you're a fan of folk in the slightest. My score here is going to be a 1.5 out of 10. And as I say that, it feels a little generous. But that's where we're going to land for now. I'll let y'all know if I adjust it later on. Next up is another very sort of different album, and that is The Veil by Gliiico. And that's Gliiico with 3 eyes, which is why I pronounced it weird. Now, this is a sort of debut from a band I'd never heard of. And let me just start by saying the first 3 tracks on this album were a surprise after a surprise after a surprise. For starters, the album is led by a pretty loud electric shoegaze track, which actually doesn't really work all that well. In fact, after I heard that first track, I became very worried about the album as a whole. The song just wasn't mixed well, and it actually kind of hurt to listen to it. But then the second song starts, and it's not shoegaze, it's actually a really fun, high energy, well-made punk track with some crazy time signatures and perfect guitar and vocals for what they were trying to do. One of my favorite tracks on the album, if not my favorite, honestly. And then the third track switches things up again with a suddenly upbeat, easygoing, really defined indie rock track. And it's at this point that the sound of the album actually starts to establish itself. The rest of this short album is very clearly indie rock with a really defined sound, especially for this being something of a debut for the band. I'll talk more to that in a second. And it's a really defined sound that I enjoy extensively. With that said, though, it is unfortunate to also say in the same breath that the last 3 tracks on the album really blend together, which is not good for a 22-minute album. Doesn't bode well for the work as a whole. But still, if you take out that opening track, I don't think there's all that bad of a song here. Just some that run together when you take it all as a whole. I do think that Brethren, which is that punk track, was totally the right move for them. I wish they had taken the album in that direction as a whole. Maybe they'll do that in the future, though. At the end of the day, I do think the band would benefit from a little more direction, especially when it came to those last 3 tracks and those first 3. They could benefit from more direction in sound, and if they're going to stick with that indie rock sound, a little more variety in it, so some direction in that sense. But I do think they have a great sound if they choose to stay in that vein, and if they decide to go punk, I think that would be an even better option. I hope they do. Regardless, this is a great starting point for their solo debut. And like I mentioned, it is their solo debut. They also had a album drop that they collabed with another artist, but this is their solo album debut. And it's going to get a 6.7 out of 10 for me. A 6.7. Not a bad listen by any means. If you're into indie rock at all, I would say give it a shot. Let's talk about the next one, though. Speaking of indie rock, this is the latest release from Westside Cowboy, It Goes On. And also their debut full-length album. And let me say, at this point in the year, my pick for Best New Artist is getting easier and easier and easier. This is actually Westside Cowboy's second release of the year, and honestly, it was among my most anticipated, or at least it was after I heard their EP from earlier this year, So Much Country Till We Get There. If you've been around any of my content for a while, you'll know that I have been loving that EP. I mentioned it in my top 20 albums of the year so far. I think it was number 2 or 3. I love that EP, and this full-length album from the band did not disappoint at all. They brought all the energy, they brought the sound, and honestly, they even brought emotion, more so than I expected. They kept the album fresh. They didn't lose a single bit of momentum over the 35-minute runtime, and I loved every second of it. I loved the sound. That hasn't changed, thankfully. They've still got that pure indie rock feel, but of course, they still managed to incorporate those folk aspects. That's really hard to ignore, but it's also hard to ignore how well it worked. Their sound is on full display from end to end, and as I already mentioned, they brought tons of energy, especially in that front half of the record. Slowly, though, they actually start to bring that energy down just over time, and those energetic, hard-rocking tracks turn into emotional, slower tracks that, even though I like those hard-rocking, high-energy tracks more, worked really, really well. The emotional bits that are thrown in work exceptionally well. I had no doubt they would, though. The guitar was fantastic. The vocals were on point. The harmonies that happened all throughout were a surprise that worked so well. The production was perfect indie rock production. And all in all, there is nothing to dislike here. I do wish the end of the record, the last 3 or so tracks, had sort of stayed in the same vein as the rest of the album. And if you listen to it, you'll know what I mean. But even still, I don't have much to complain about there. I just didn't love it as much of the rest of it. So not only is this an absolutely amazing debut, but it's another fantastic listen from the band. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this band. And with 2 incredible releases in 1 year, I don't know if there's much else to ask for. Both of these could very well end up in my top albums of the year, truly. So right now I'm rocking with an 8.4 out of 10 for It Goes On. 8.4 out of 10. Not at all bad for a debut album. Next up was not a debut. In fact, it was from a band who has been around longer than I've been alive, and that is the latest release from Weezer. Weezer, also known as the Gold Album, which is probably what I'll put on the screen here. Now, this album was somewhat of a return to form for the band, and I appreciated that much, but let me also start this by saying that the first stretch of this record felt more like genuine rock and roll than almost anything else I've heard in a long time. And that's including releases from Geese, the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, and plenty of others who would really fit that mold. This first stretch of the Gold Album feels so genuine. It's amazing. Those first 4 tracks were fantastic. The sound was there. The Weezer formula was there too, but I'm telling you, the sound was so good. And if you listen to it, surely you'll know what I mean. But it all worked really well. Those first 4 tracks worked really well. And again, harping on that sound, they nailed a really genuine early post-Beatles rock sound. A sound that many people try to emulate and most people can't without either straight up stealing from another band's sound or sounding totally modern. It felt really special for a second. And then came CEO, and from that track forward, everything that was working about the album was just kind of tossed out of the window. The lyrics traded a really endearing feel for an in-your-face, corny feel. The rock sound was then totally lacking, and production felt totally empty all of a sudden. The songwriting altogether felt like an afterthought in this stretch, and as a whole, those first 4 tracks, that first stretch, felt really thought out, intentional, and had a feel that a lot of time and effort was put into making it as exceptional as it was. But the last 6 songs, they felt rushed and, generally speaking, uncared for in comparison. They were closer here, closer than they've been in a while to something great, but this is still not what I want to see from the band, or really from anybody for that matter. My score here is a 5.8. The first 4 tracks really carry the record. Next up was my last listen of the week, and that was Long Way Home by STELLA Lefty. I've heard a lot of people talking about this artist. I had no clue who she was for a while. I've heard a lot of strong opinions, and let's just say I kind of understand those opinions now. Because everything about this record did not work. And there is a lot working against it. For starters, this album just didn't feel anything like it should have, or in all honesty, probably like the artist wanted it to. If I'm being totally honest, and this is what I told my wife after listening to it the first time, it really felt like a Valley girl trying to make a genuine country album. And after I got done listening to the album as a whole, I found out that that description is actually pretty accurate as to what's happening here. Every ounce of this album, every second of this album felt inauthentic and unconvincing in every way. I could spend a long time talking about things like the accent she attempts to put on, the way she tries to enunciate certain words, her vocal style when she's not trying to emulate popular country, which, by the way, she does not do well, or just the topics and themes she's singing about. But at the end of the day, it's easier just to say none of it is remotely effective at all. It feels so shallow and it feels so undeniably inauthentic. The production is also totally lacking, and it leaves most tracks feeling really, really empty. And again, if you've been around this channel for any amount of time, you've probably heard me say that empty production is one thing I just cannot get over. The songwriting and lyrical choices were totally bland and ineffective. And if I had to describe the album in one or two words, well, the first one would be inauthentic, but the second would just be bland. Even the parts that don't feel super inauthentic, which are most of the album, even the parts that don't feel that way are just bland. It's soulless, it's lifeless, it's unseasoned chicken, it's weird, it's not great. So obviously, as you can tell, I do not feel very positively about this debut album. There is a lot that needs to be improved on, whether that's the direction that she takes her music or the actual work she puts in her recording sessions. There's something that's got to change. In my opinion, maybe if she stuck with pop folk, that could be a good way to go. And in all honesty, that's what I expected in the first place. But this attempted emulation of country, and in all honesty, I don't even know what kind of country she was trying to emulate. Whether it was modern or classic or somewhere in between, I don't know. And maybe that's also part of the problem here. She's got no clue what she's trying to make. And that just completely bleeds through. Again, I expected some sort of pop folk, Noah Kahan type album. That was not what it was. I don't know. I don't know what she needs to do. I'm not saying she needs to quit music. But something's got to change here. My score here is a 1.1 out of 10. And like I mentioned earlier with another one of the albums, that almost feels a little generous. But maybe that's what happens when you listen to so many new albums. The bad is really bad and the great is really great. So anyway, that's it. That wraps up my listening for last week. I would love to know what you guys think of these records. Have you listened to them? Do you like them? Let me know in the comments. Maybe you hate them. Do you have any records you want me to listen to because you like them or hate them? Let me know in the comments. I would love to take your recommendations as always. And of course, if you like this video, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell. Come back next week. I'm trying to think of what I've listened to so far this week. It's pretty early in the week. I listened to the new Benny Blanco album. If you want to see my review of that piece, come back for that. It was bad. I'm going to go ahead and tell y'all it was bad. But anyway, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. I appreciate you. Come on back next time.